they come out with a flimsy excuse by saying it's...
This is Steve Zeltzer with Workweek, and we have covered the struggle in the UAW, including the last election, the election of Shawn Fain, and the battle that took place around that election. And there were a number of complaints that were made by rank and file members about the right to campaign, to get their campaign literature out. And we're joined today by George Windau. He is a retired member of UAW Local 12 in Toledo, Ohio. And he had an experience during that election campaign and has filed a complaint with the Monitor, filed a complaint with Neil Barofsky about his issue of the right to campaign. So welcome to our show, George.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So George, you were active in that campaign. Why don't you talk about that election campaign and why you ended up filing a complaint with the UAW Election Monitor?
Okay, I worked at Jeep. I was still employed. I didn't retire until April of this year, but I and some other activists supporting Shawn Fain and the Members United slate were campaigning around town at Dana, of course, at Jeep where we work. But we also went over to a General Motors, it's called General Motors Propulsions. They do drivetrains, build drivetrains for GM products. And we had problems at one out at the Dana outlet. So they said that we were littering when we were passing out flyers and they were going to call the cops. So, and we tried to talk to their HR officer, but they wouldn't let us. So I went to General Motors with the idea that I would get permission or at least find out what their rules are and get a written copy so that we could follow those rules. But to my astonishment, when I went to the guard shack and talked to a woman named Julie Burst, who was a security officer, she said that she had to call Local 14. Now, and they said, Local 14 said, no, we're not allowed to pass out flyers in the parking lot when the shift changes. Now, this is in February of 2023. It was probably February 6th or thereabout. The weather was not always favorable to us. So we're hoping to pass out flyers. The 6th was a Monday. We were hoping to pass out flyers by Thursday or Friday if the weather permitted. And but when Julie Burst said Local 14 says you're not allowed to do that, I said, no, wait a minute. You're misreading the situation. This is not Local 14 property. This is General Motors property. I need to talk to the HR officer and get their policy on passing out literature. Well, she gave me the number. I called, and it turns out the woman's name is Susan Guthrow, and she never returned my call until Thursday the 9th, and she told me that no one who does not work at that General Motors factory is allowed to pass out literature on their property, including the parking lot area where workers park and come in and go out of the gates. And I said, well, can I get that in writing? She said, no, you can't. And I said, well, what happens if I violate your unwritten rule and come out and pass out flyers in favor of electing Shawn Fain since it's a national campaign? And she said, if you do that, we will call law enforcement. Now, she didn't say that I would be arrested, but I think I made a fair inference that she intended to arrest me or anyone who was with me to pass out flyers in the parking lot as workers came in and out at the shift change. So rather than get arrested or see any of my friends get arrested, we declined. But I called the Monitor to complain, and they gave me an email, so I sent the email. And then I called the National Labor Relations Board about this. And they said, well, there's nothing in the law that guarantees your right to participate in union elections. So I said, okay. And then I find out 6 days later, a friend of mine who worked at General Motors Propulsion sent me a screenshot of Ray Curry, who was Shawn Fain's opponent, passing out literature, shaking hands, and greeting the workers at the shift change. And this is on or about February 14th or 15th. I'm not sure which date, but it was about 6 days later. So when that happened, I immediately informed the Monitor, Mr. Borofsky's office. He called it the election team. And I also filed charges with the National Labor Relations Board. They assigned me to a woman named Megan Sobczak, who immediately told me the companies have a right to show favoritism in any election that they want. And I said, oh, really? Well, what do you mean they show favoritism? It's their private property. Don't you understand that? On their private property, they can do anything they want with regard to elections. And I said, isn't this an unfair labor practice that they allow one candidate to campaign, but not another? So finally, my charge at the labor board was put at active. And as soon as the active charge was sent to the General Motors office, I got the news that Susan Guthrow had been fired. So I don't know if it's because of my actions with the labor board, but I assumed that that was possible. But now we are 1.5 years from filing both the complaint with the election team of Neil Barofsky and the National Labor Relations Board, and they have done nothing. They have never said, yes, you have a good case and we're going to rule in your favor. And they have not said, no, you have no good case and we're dismissing your charge. They have said neither. All they will say is it's active. That's the labor board. Now with Neil Barofsky, they have said nothing. And I sent you a copy of the emails to Neil Barofsky's office. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because if you read the latest labor notes issue, they talk about Mr. Borofsky accusing Shawn Fain of corruption of some sort. And it's not really clear what that corruption is, but it made all the Detroit newspapers. So I would like to point out that after 1.5 years, Mr. Borofsky won't rule in favor or won't rule against me, because if he rules against me, it's going to be news that workers do not have the right to campaign if management says no. You don't have but they can show favoritism to any candidate they want. Now, Ray Curry's solidarity team is the remnants of the administrative caucus or the Ruther caucus, whichever name you want to use. And they've been tied with other groups or other individuals who were sentenced for corruption, which is the reason that Mr. Borofsky assumed the role of monitor in this UAW issue. So I just want to make sure people understand that Neil Barofsky is not unbiased. He is 100% for management. Now I have other issues, and I think you might know of a retiree named Frank Hammer from UAW 909. He also filed a complaint with the monitor, Mr. Borofsky, who said that, well, and the reason Frank did that is he was at a CAP council meeting. Now, this is a UAW meeting. It's not anything to do with any management or corporation. It's a UAW meeting where the administrative caucus was passing out their flyers for Ray Curry, and he was passing out flyers for Shawn Fain and was told he could not do that and was forced to pick up every flyer he put on under every chair or hand it out. They had to collect it. It took several weeks before Mr. Borofsky said, well, yeah, maybe this isn't fair. But I don't know of any remedy that he took to make sure that the Ray Curry solidarity team didn't discriminate or bully people who were in favor of Shawn Fain. So this is, and I appreciate this opportunity to get this word out that Mr. Borofsky is a partisan. And my case is different from Frank's because I am asking to rule against management's showing of favoritism toward Mr. Curry and his team of candidates and showing disfavor and not allowing any resolution of my complaint, which I filed in February of 2023. And you know the date today.
And part of the concern that obviously you have is a future election. If this is not ruled on, management could do the same thing again, and that is favor one slate or another slate. Is that one of your concerns, that in fact the intervention of management into UAW election is a systemic problem and could be a real problem in another election?
Absolutely. This is exactly why I'm doing is Now I've waited a year and a half, and what spurred me into motion in this situation is that I heard that Borofsky had the audacity to tell Shawn Fain that he's not supposed to, the IAB is not supposed to rule in favor of a ceasefire in Gaza, which is kind of absurd considering the UAW's history in the 70s, because there was a defund Israeli investments in the UAW back in 1973. So there's a history of the UAW taking a sort of medium or middle path between the warring or disputing parties between Israel and Palestine, and not showing favoritism to Israel or one side or the other. So when I heard that, and then I heard he was being charged with corruption, which is kind of absurd since our whole campaign, our slogans were no corruption, no concessions, no tears. So I found it hard to believe. And when I found out, I talked about this, I talked to a reporter at Detroit News, and he says, well, there's no evidence of the corruption, but he has, if someone says Shawn Fain is a bank robber, that it has to go in accuses him of being a bank robber, then Mr. Borofsky has to investigate it, and he has to put it in the court record, which is public. So if you want the Detroit News to report that Shawn Fain is a bank robber, just tell Mr. Borofsky that information, and he'll publish it in a court record, and it'll be front page news.
And Neil Barofsky has said that he's doing oversight. He is doing oversight. The UAW is paying for it. The members are paying for it. There has been systemic corruption in past leaders who went to jail. That's one of the reasons he was brought in by the government. They said that the UAW had a problem with corruption. But Neil Barofsky, as you say, sent a statement by the ADL to the executive board around the issue of Palestine. What does that have to do with corruption?
Boy, you got me. I don't understand it either. All I can say is that this guy has some attitudes, and he has his idea of what the UAW should be. Now, let me just preface this with a foundational concept. When the convictions of the 14 top leaders and the one, get this, 14 top UAW leaders were convicted, but only one management representative went to jail. Somehow, bribery and corruption, is a two-sided issue, but only one side really was suffering, and the other side only got a slap on the wrist. So you can see what kind of bias exists. But you have to understand that when Mr. Borofsky stepped in as a court-appointed monitor, there were union members who contacted Mr. Borofsky and said, look, according to the National Labor Relations Act, we have two possibilities for the selection of our national leaders. We can use a delegate system, which members elect delegates from their various locals, and they go to a convention and elect the top leaders at the convention. And there's another option, which is direct election of the officers by the direct vote of the members, just like we would vote for president of the United States. We're not electing delegates. Well, in some ways, you might say the Electoral College is the delegate system, but the point is we have a direct ability to vote for or against whatever presidential candidate is on the ballot. Now, you have to understand that Mr. Borofsky was assured by Shawn Fain and by Ray Curry and his team that there was no way that the members would vote in a referendum for direct election of the officers. And I worked on that campaign with other activists in the UAW to get members to vote in favor of what we call one member, one vote. And it passed. That was a surprise. That was a big surprise to Mr. Borofsky, who thought everything was going to stay the same as a delegate system. And then when we assembled a slate called Members United, that was another surprise that we were able to field candidates for all but one of the open positions in the top leadership of the UAW. And when that happened, he was assured that they wouldn't win. Well, it turns out that we swept. Every candidate we supported was elected, except for, of course, Shawn Fain had to go into a runoff against Ray Curry. And that was in January and February was the time period of this campaign. And then when Shawn Fain won, he became the president of the UAW in March of 2023. So number one, Mr. Borofsky was shocked that we went to a one-member, one-vote system, and was very surprised that Shawn Fain won. I would say unpleasantly surprised, because obviously management favored Ray Curry and his so-called solidarity team. So because of that, he's been unpleasantly surprised by this whole process and not expecting things to turn out the way they did. And as far as this ruling or this resolution on supporting a ceasefire in Gaza, which to me seems reasonable, and our members also likely support that. I mean, I haven't heard any opposition to that. I haven't heard anyone say, "Oh, let's have a bigger war." No, people can see the suffering in Gaza, and they think the UAW did the right thing. So, as far as the upcoming election, let me tell you what the NLRB has said. See, I filed 2 complaints: one with the Monitor, Mr. Borofsky, and one with the NLRB. Now, the NLRB, I complained about the 1.5-year wait, and I contacted the Inspector General, and I was called and told that, oh, we're gonna check on this to see what's going on. And the NLRB says, oh, we just don't have enough people. I got a call from Amy Farrell at Region 8 in Cleveland, which is where they have the authority to go with this complaint. And she said, well, your complaint is not that important, George. I said, how do you figure? Well, there's no money involved. Well, no, I'm not asking for money. I'm asking to declare that management has no right to show favoritism to one national candidate in our union versus another national candidate in our union. And she said, I said, well, and it's been 1.5 years. The elections, we're going to have elections again pretty soon. And she said, well, I just don't see that we're going to be able to rule on this until after your next union elections. So at the conference we were on Saturday, you mentioned captive agencies like what's the Environmental Protection Agency? EPA. The EPA is captured agency. And now we see that the NLRB is just the same, at least Region 8. And when I talked to what's her name, Megan Sobczak, who is supposedly the officer assigned to my case, I said, were you appointed by Donald Trump? And she got very upset with me for asking that. But from what she's told me, that employers, because they are property owners, have the right to show favoritism in any election. That leads me to believe she's thinking more along the lines of a Republican like Mr. Trump. So I think this Region 8 office in Cleveland is, I think on the weekends, it's a Trump headquarters.
And at the Republican convention, which attacked immigrants, was very right-wing. They want to take away the right of unions to organize. They want to basically put the companies directly in charge. Former President Trump actually said that Shawn Fain should be fired and that UAW members should not vote for the Democrats. What did you think about? It's the first time I've heard about a presidential candidate, Republican presidential candidate, actually calling for the removal of a president of a union. I mean, he's probably pretty angry that Shawn Fain called him a scab and a company man, but for him to call for the removal of a president by being fired. What does that mean to you? And what does that, do you see that as any danger if Trump is elected?
Well, let me say this, that and I've read a lot about labor unions, and I've never come across any labor union anywhere on this planet that does not at first or eventually turn to political issues and make endorsements on political candidates. We are in a time period where the unions are going to be more involved in politics, more involved with political issues and political candidates than in the past. Now, do I say that, oh, my union's always made the best choice in who to endorse and so forth? No, I would never say that, but I defend the union's right to choose who to endorse for candidacy. Now, Trump, as you'll remember, had a rally someplace, I think it was in Detroit, union members for Trump. And as the reporters went through the crowd, they asked each person, "Oh, what union do you belong to?" I'm not a union member. I'm in management. I'm in management. So I challenged Donald Trump to show me one card-carrying union member who is at his phony baloney union members for Trump. So that's what I think of Mr. Trump. And I'm sure Shawn Fain is almost laughing as hard as I am at the idiocy of a man to come out as a candidate, to come out and attack a UAW member or official like this. Now, I want to emphasize in this interview that I have proof of everything I say. When I say that General Motors denied me the right to campaign in their parking lot during shift change so I could talk to workers about Shawn Fain, I also have proof of 6 days later that Ray Curry, who was Fain's opponent, came into the parking lot. I gave you a link to the Facebook page, and anyone can go on this link and see Ray Curry campaigning, shaking hands, not only with workers coming in and out of the turnstiles, but with union officials from Local 14, including the recording secretary and the president of the local. So I have proof, and you can still go to it because Ray Curry has left it on his Facebook page. So now, a year and a half later, the proof is still fresh. It hasn't been taken down. It hasn't been deleted. I have proof of my filing with the labor board. I have copies of everything. So this is not a sour grapes issue. This is a fact that when we want to talk about the UAW being under the control of the Monitor, this Monitor is hostile to the UAW leadership as it exists, and he's hostile to the one member, one vote. So when you have someone pretending to be unbiased, having authority over the UAW, and then openly complaining that the UAW took a position on the war in Gaza, his bias is there. He's the emperor with no clothes on. That's what Neil Barofsky is, and the union members should know that. Now, I assume that Mr. Trump is going to keep attacking Shawn Fain, and I assume that the Detroit News and Detroit Free Press and all the news media will continue to say that Shawn Fain is corrupt. Why not call him a bank robber? I mean, that would really show corruption. But see, they don't have any proof. They have no proof. But I do. I do. And that's what I'm trying to get out, to point out that this captured agency called the NLRB Region 8 and Mr. Borofsky are against the direction that our unions are going, and I'm cheering us on. I am retired, but I have a lot of activist apprentices that are working now in the Jeep factory and elsewhere, and I have a lot of connections, and I'm cheering Mr. Brother Fain on, and hoping that this kills the so-called corruption charges against him.
Now, Mike Elk from Payday has written an article just a couple of days ago. I don't know if you read it, but in it he says that the lawyer that actually was working for Ron Kerry and was convicted of a felony is now working for the UAW. And the reason I raise that is because one of the issues in the government going after Ron Kerry was the successful UPS strike. And that was an important strike in American labor history. It was successful, and the government and the employers didn't like it. And that was probably one of the reasons they accused him of being corrupt and charged him with corruption and removed him from being president. And he won his corruption trial. He was not corrupt. He won the trial, but they had removed him as president. Do you see that as a danger, particularly if Trump is elected? They would, make charges against Shawn Fain for being corrupt in order to get him removed. And also, since the UAW is already in monitorship, basically taking over the UAW and putting it in trusteeship under a Trump administration.
After I saw the president of the PATCO unions, Stephen Waller, put in chains and leg irons in 1982 and frog marched to prison for 60 days because he wanted his union members to have adequate machinery to do their job, adequate equipment. I saw that in 1982. And I've heard from friends in other countries about union presidents who are shot on their way to walking to their union halls in El Salvador, which was with a government that was supported by the United States. Nothing would surprise me, especially with Donald Trump. I think there was some famous person once said, history repeats itself. The second time is farce. I'm afraid that this time it's going to be a farce. Everyone can see that this lawyer who has refused to turn over documents so that they have an excuse to berate our leadership in the UAW, he has been removed from what I understand. I don't know his name, but from what I understand, he's been removed. So he is not going to be a factor at this time. But actually, the people who are trying to stop the union democracy, the control of the unions by the membership, I feel are going to be frustrated. Now, I have to tell you, if you look at the history of the UAW, it started out with two factions. One was called AFL-CIO, and the other, one was called UAW-AFL, and the other faction was called UAW-CIO. They didn't get along. And the reason is that the AFL, they were what we call pork choppers. They want to have an easy job, put their feet up on the desk, no problems, and just ride the gravy train. And then the UAW-CIO were activists, fighters, people who wanted to struggle for the rights and benefits of the workers and to make political pronouncements and endorse candidates that they felt were pro-labor and pro-union. So because we have this dynamic, and it exists in every union, you have the careerists versus the activists, and they're going to fight. And that fight has not been resolved in the UAW. The careerists are still there. And the activists are gaining ground. So yes, the government is going to step in and try and tip the balance. Yes, whatever Trump, or believe me, if Trump loses badly, it's still going to happen because the NLRB is now under the control of Jennifer Abruzzo. Why? I've sent a letter to her. I sent a letter to the Inspector General. And they said, oh, we'll talk to Region 8. Well, they haven't done anything. Region 8 told me they have no intention of ruling on my case. Not that they I'm not saying rule in favor of me. I'm not saying that they have to do that. Just rule on it. Give me a yes, give me a no. If you give me a no, I'm going to come on this program and tell you that they are indeed a captured industry, a captured regulatory agency, and everyone can see it. And it's the same thing with Mr. Borofsky. Now the NLRB can tell me, oh, we don't have enough people to take care of this. It's just so complicated, and we don't have enough people. But Mr. Borofsky, what has he got to do? If he has time to complain about the IEB saying that they're supporting a ceasefire, doesn't he have time to rule on my complaint? Give me a yes, give me a no, give me something. You know what they say, do it or get off the pot.
Okay, well, I want to thank you very much for joining us, George. I think this issue is important, not just for the UAW, all workers in the United States. And one of the things that may happen, the NLRB could be, as you say, a captured agency, and it could say we're not going to have any more elections through that process. That's a great danger, because a lot of these elections in the UAW and other unions could end under the Trump administration. I mean, that's a real possibility. So I want to thank you for joining us. And what can people do who want to support your fight for a decision on your complaint about the company being involved in the union election, the last union election?
You can send me an email to GWINDAU. You can see my name there. If you just take the G from George and add it to my last name, WINDAU, at AOL, and ask me for a copy of an open letter to Mr. Borofsky, and I will send you the link that you can go and see the Facebook page of Ray Curry happily campaigning at a place that Shawn Fain is not allowed to campaign at. So, and my complaint is different from Frank Hammer's, because this is against management, a corporation, which Mr. Borofsky is not really going to come out and take away their right to show favoritism. So at the very least, can he just say, no, your complaint is found wrong? So anyhow, send me an email and I will send you those two things, a copy of the letter to Mr. Borofsky and also the link to Ray Curry's Facebook page to prove my case.